Maybe you should eat upstairs, my daughter-in-law said calmly as I was just about to sit down at the Christmas table I had been up since 4:30 a.m. preparing and cooking for. But this was my house, so I took off my apron, walked to the head of the table, and did something that made all of her guests fall silent. The turkey had been in the oven since 6 in the morning. The skin was turning that deep amber gold that my late husband Gerald used to say looked like something out of a magazine, even when the kitchen was a disaster and there was flour on my reading glasses and a ring of butter near the pie crust scraps that I hadn't wiped up yet. The cranberry sauce was cooling in my mother's blue glass bowl, the one she brought out every December until her hands got too stiff to carry it, and she passed it to me like a quiet inheritance. The whole house smelled like sage and onion and roasted stock, that thick layered warmth that settles into the curtains and the hallway carpet and makes even the coat closet smell like Christmas. I had been up since 4:30 a.m. I was 63 years old. I was wearing my apron, the one with the faded holly print that Gerald bought me as a joke from a craft fair in 2004, and that I'd worn every holiday since because the joke had become the tradition, and the tradition had become the thing I reached for in the dark kitchen before dawn, the way some people reach for coffee or prayer. And my daughter-in-law looked at me from the kitchen doorway, looked at me from head to toe, the apron, the oven mitts tucked under my arm, the glasses pushed up into my hair, the flushed face that comes from standing near 2 hot ovens for 7 hours, and said, calm as a closed door, "We didn't really plan this as your thing, Beverly. Maybe you'd be more comfortable eating upstairs tonight. My kitchen, my house, my name on the deed since 1993, my cranberry sauce cooling in my dead mother's bowl." I stood there holding a dish towel, and for a moment I could not breathe, not because I was surprised. I think somewhere underneath all the soft explanations I'd been giving myself for months, I had known a moment like this was coming. I just hadn't wanted to see it arrive in full daylight, wearing lipstick with guests in the next room. If you had asked me 14 months earlier whether my life would ever narrow down to a single sentence spoken over the sound of my own gravy simmering on the stove, I would have said absolutely not. Not because I thought my life was immune to hurt. I buried my husband, I know exactly what hurt can do. But because I believed I understood the shape of the people I loved. I believed I knew where the edges were. I believed that even when things got difficult, basic kindness would act like a railing, would keep everyone from falling too far. I was wrong about that, and if I'm going to tell this properly, I have to go back. Not just because the beginning matters, but because stories like this never start where people think they do. They don't begin with one sharp sentence in a kitchen full of holiday food. They begin earlier, in smaller places. A phone call, a favor, a chair moved 6 inches to the left, a tone you excuse because you're tired, a silence you swallow because you love someone and you don't want love to become accounting. It was a Tuesday in March, about 14 months before that Christmas, when my son Trevor called me from the parking lot of his apartment building and asked if he and his wife could stay with me for a while. Trevor is 36. He has his father's eyes, that particular gray-green that can look soft in one light and distant in another. Gerald had those eyes the first time I saw him, when I was 22, and he sat down next to me at a community choir rehearsal in Grand Rapids, wearing a navy windbreaker and carrying sheet music in a cracked leather folder. He smelled like cold air and coffee. When he smiled at me, I had the strange immediate feeling that my life had just tilted 1 inch in a direction it would never fully tilt back from. We were married for 31 years. Trevor was born 2 years in, and he was the kind of child who made parenting feel less like labor and more like privilege. Curious, gentle, thoughtful in that old-fashioned way, where he'd notice if your hands were full and open the door before you asked. At 9, he used to leave notes for me on the kitchen counter in careful block letters if I had an early appointment. At 15, when boys can so easily turn into strangers in their own houses, he was still the kid who carried in grocery bags without being told. Gerald died 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed in October, gone by February. Those 4 months were the longest and shortest of my life. Every day stretched thin with waiting. Every week vanished before I could absorb what it had taken from us. One day he was still making lists for spring projects and reminding Trevor to rotate his tires. A few weeks later, he couldn't stand at the kitchen sink. After he died, everyone had opinions. My neighbors suggested downsizing. My sister Elaine wanted me closer to her in Ann Arbor. A woman from church told me, very kindly and very firmly, that staying in a house full of memories could keep a widow from moving forward. But I didn't experience the house as a museum. I experienced it as the shape of my life. The house Gerald and I bought when Trevor was 4. The little 2-story colonial with the uneven front walk and the maple tree that turns almost offensively beautiful every October. The house Gerald and his brother Mike spent an entire summer renovating, arguing about crown molding and drinking beer on the back deck after dark. The house where Trevor learned to tie his shoes on the second stair, where Gerald sang badly while shoveling the driveway, where I stood at the kitchen sink and watched thunderstorms move across the yard for 3 decades. Every wall had memory in it. Every room had repetition. And repetition is not the enemy people make it out to be. Sometimes repetition is what keeps a life from dissolving. So when Trevor called that Tuesday and said things had gotten financially difficult, his contract position had ended, Sasha's online consulting business wasn't steady yet, the rent was too high, I said yes before he finished the sentence. Just until we stabilize, he said. 3 or 4 months, we'll contribute to groceries. We'll help around the house. It won't be a burden, Mom. I promise. I believed him. He was my son. Of course course I believed him. And I want to be fair to Sasha because fairness matters most when it's hardest. When Trevor first brought her over for dinner 3.5 years earlier, I liked her, genuinely. She was pretty in a striking, clean-lined way, with dark hair she always wore neatly, and a face that didn't hide what it was thinking. She was quick and funny, and had that direct modern confidence that sometimes makes older women defensive, but it didn't make me defensive. She said what she thought. I admired that. When they married at a small vineyard outside Traverse City, I danced at the reception until my feet hurt, and my mascara smudged, and I meant every bit of the joy on my face. I hugged Sasha in the ladies' room because she was crying from nerves, and I told her, "You don't have to be perfect to be loved in this family." I meant it. I had no private campaign against her, no secret ledger of offenses, no mother-in-law suspicion waiting for proof. What I had was trust. And trust, if you're not careful, can keep you standing in the doorway long after the room has changed. They moved in on a Saturday in late March with a rented van, 2 cats, and more boxes than I expected for people who said they'd only be staying a few months. I'd spent 3 days preparing. I cleared the largest guest bedroom, the one with the east-facing window and the attached bath Gerald always called the suite. I washed the curtains, ironed the pillowcases, left a vase of grocery store tulips on the dresser, and a little basket with toothpaste, fresh soap, and a tin of peppermint tea because Sasha liked herbal tea in the evenings. I wanted them to feel welcome. I wanted the arrangement to feel less like refuge and more like family. The first few weeks were quiet and pleasant. Trevor made coffee in the mornings, and sometimes we sat at the kitchen table together before Sasha woke up, the same way we used to on slow Saturdays when he was 16. Sasha worked from her laptop at the dining room table. She kept her papers stacked neatly, wore headphones on calls, thanked me for dinners, offered to order takeout once a week. Nothing felt ominous. I remember thinking, this is an adjustment, but it's a manageable one. The first change was so small it almost didn't register. One morning in early May, I came downstairs and found the throw pillows on my living room sofa rearranged. That sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud. Throw pillows. The kind of thing lifestyle magazines tell women to stop caring about. But Gerald bought 2 of those pillows at a market in Door County during our 25th anniversary trip, when we'd gotten caught in a rainstorm and ducked into a little shop to dry off. I'd sewn the other 2 myself from a bolt of fabric I bought downtown before the store closed for good. I liked where they sat. I liked how they looked when the afternoon light came through the window. Now 2 of them had been moved to the armchair in the corner, and the patterned ones were centered stiffly on the sofa like something staged for a realtor's photograph. I didn't say anything. I moved them back and told myself it was nothing. That was the first mistake. Not because the pillows mattered so much, but because I let myself translate a message instead of hearing it. I told myself the change was innocent. I told myself Sasha was just trying to make the room look nice. 2 weeks later, the small watercolor painting in my hallway was gone. My friend Patricia had painted it for me the year after Gerald died. A winter street scene, soft blues and grays. The kind of painting that feels like a held breath. It was leaning inside the coat closet, face turned inward, replaced by a large abstract print I'd never seen before. Gray and dusty rose with sharp black lines. Expensive looking, cold. I stood there longer than I should have, feeling the particular ache of having something private handled by someone who didn't understand its weight. I went to Trevor. Sasha thought the hallway felt a little dark, he said. He already looked tired. She got that print at a pop-up shop downtown. She's been trying to make the space feel more like home. Home. I remember that word with unusual clarity. It entered the air between us and hardened there. Trevor, I said very evenly, this is my house, and that painting has meaning to me. Please put it back. He nodded. The abstract print stayed up for 4 more days. Then Patricia's watercolor quietly reappeared. I didn't make a scene. I told myself these things take time. 3 adults under one roof, different tastes. Adjustment. That's the word women like me reach for when we're trying to dignify discomfort. But there was no adjustment. There was erosion. By June, Sasha had reorganized my kitchen cupboards. I came downstairs to make tea and couldn't find my favorite mug, the hand-thrown ceramic one Trevor made for me at a pottery class when he was 12. He'd glazed it an uneven blue that pooled darker near the handle, and one side leaned slightly because at 12, symmetry hadn't interested him as much as effort. I loved that mug in the irrational way mothers love evidence that their children's hands once made clumsy, beautiful things for them. I found it shoved to the back of a high shelf behind a row of matching white mugs Sasha had bought. It's just more functional this way, she said when I asked. The matching set looks cleaner. Yours is a bit uneven. It was taking up space. I looked at her. My son made me that mug when he was 12, I said. It lives at the front. She gave me a tight, bright smile. Of course. Whatever you prefer. Whatever you prefer. There are phrases that sound accommodating until you hear the contempt hiding in the corners. By July, she asked to use my sewing room as her office. The small room off the hallway that I'd put together after Gerald died, fabric on open shelves arranged by color, my grandmother's sewing cabinet in the corner, the wide table by the window where I cut quilt pieces and did hemming jobs, the kind of quiet, private room that becomes an extension of your breathing when grief has left your mind too noisy. I said no, plainly, not harshly, and I saw, almost instantly, that Sasha was not used to hearing a simple no delivered without apology. I completely understand, she said, smiling. No problem at all. 3 days later, I found 2 monitor screens set up on my work table. My fabric had been moved into stacked bins on the floor. My grandmother's sewing cabinet had been pushed sideways to make room for a sleek, ergonomic chair. I stood in that room and felt something inside me go very still. I went to Trevor. "She's really under pressure with the business," he said. He sounded torn. "It's temporary. We discussed this." I said no. "I know. I'll talk to her." He talked to her. She apologized. Her monitors stayed on my work table for 6 more weeks. "I need you to understand something. I'm not listing these things because I enjoy grievance. I'm listing them because this is how a person loses ground without ever seeing the full map of it until later. Nobody marches into your home on day 1 and announces a takeover. If they did, you'd react. Anyone would. What happens instead is that the changes arrive one at a time, each one just small enough to seem survivable, just minor enough to feel embarrassing to fight over. And before long, you're no longer defending a room or a shelf or a mug. You're defending your right to remain legible inside your own life." By September, 6 months into what had been framed as a 3 to 4 month stay, 2 things were clear. They had no plan to leave. Trevor had picked up a new contract. Money wasn't abundant, but it wasn't desperate. Yet there was no apartment hunting, no timeline, no conversation about next steps. And Sasha had shifted from living in the house to managing it. New kitchen rug, bought without asking. Soap dispensers in the bathroom swapped for matte black ones she preferred. She discussed the fence line with my neighbor Doug as if she were the homeowner. She used phrases like, "We should really streamline this area," while standing in rooms I had lived in for longer than she'd been alive. And Trevor, my thoughtful, gray-eyed son, who once carried in grocery bags without being asked, said little. Or when he did speak, he spoke in the voice of a man trying to keep the emotional weather from breaking, not the voice of a man who understood the actual harm being done. That difference matters. The desire to keep peace is not the same thing as the willingness to protect what is right. In October, I sat down at the kitchen table after dinner and wrote a letter to Gerald. I do this sometimes when the world feels slightly off its axis. I told him I missed him. I told him I didn't know how to handle what was happening without becoming someone I didn't want to be. I told him I was tired of negotiating for oxygen in my own home. Then I folded the letter, slipped it into the old recipe tin where I keep things I can't quite throw away, and sat in the silence long enough for a clearer thought to arrive. I had been asking for room in a place that was already mine. I'd been saying "I'd prefer" and "if you don't mind" and "when you have a chance." Those are not the language of boundaries. They're the language of wishes. And wishes are easy to ignore when someone benefits from your reluctance. In November, I sat them both down at my kitchen table. The one Gerald and I bought at an estate sale in 1997, with the small scratch on the left corner where Trevor once dragged a hockey bag across it when he was 15 and late for practice. "I love you both," I said, "and I was glad to help when you needed it, but I need us to agree on some things." I had written my points down because age has taught me that when conversations matter, paper helps. It keeps the heart from running too far ahead of the facts. I told them the sewing room was not available as an office. I told them any changes to the house needed to be discussed with me first. I told them I expected the original arrangement to have an actual end date, and asked them to begin apartment searching immediately, with a timeline by month's end. Sasha listened with her hands folded on the table and the expression people wear when they want to look reasonable in front of a witness. She nodded at all the right moments. "Of course, Beverly, we appreciate everything you've done for us." Trevor looked relieved, the way a man looks when a conversation he's been dreading turns out gentler than feared. Nothing changed. The monitors came out of the sewing room, but there was no apartment search, no shift in tone, no acknowledgement that I had drawn a line that required respect. And then December arrived. The first week, Sasha informed me she was planning a Christmas gathering. Her sister Pam and Pam's husband Greg, 2 friends from her business network. December 23rd. "I thought it would be nice to have people over," she said. "That sounds nice," I said. "I'll need a guest list so I can plan the food." She tilted her head like I'd misunderstood the structure of the idea. "Oh, I was going to handle all of that. You don't need to worry about a thing." That smallest thread of heat moved through me. "It's my house, Sasha. Any gathering here involves me." "Of course," she said quickly. "I just meant I wanted to take the pressure off you. Take the pressure off me." As if I were an elderly relative to be gently steered away from the center of things before I embarrassed myself with effort. I let it pass, because I was tired, because I still had some foolish hope that clarity might arrive without collision. December 22nd, the day before, I came downstairs and found the dining room rearranged. My 8 walnut dining chairs, purchased slowly over 20 years because I couldn't afford them all at once, and because I loved the idea that beautiful things could be gathered patiently, had been supplemented with 6 folding chairs from somewhere. The table had been dragged toward the center of the room. The sideboard where I kept Gerald's mother's china had been shoved against the far wall. On top of it stood a line of white pillar candles, and an arrangement of bare branches and berries that looked like it came from one of those expensive lifestyle stores where everything smells like cedar and ambition. My own Christmas centerpiece, the one I had remade every year since the first winter Gerald and I were married, a low arrangement of pine boughs, pine cones, and the small brass reindeer he bought me from a holiday market in 1994, was sitting on the floor on a spread of newspaper, like something waiting to be thrown away. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then I walked over, picked up the centerpiece, brushed a stray pine needle from the paper, and set it back at the center of my table where it belonged. Moved the candles to the sideboard, went to make coffee. Sasha came down around 9:30. I heard her stop in the dining room. Then she appeared in the kitchen doorway. "I had that arranged a specific way." "I know," I said, and I moved it. Her mouth tightened. "My brass reindeer go on my table at Christmas Christmas," I added. "They always have." She stared at me for a second, then turned and went upstairs. Trevor came to find me an hour later, wearing that particular weariness he'd carried for months. The look of a man who believes his job is to survive tension rather than resolve anything. "Mom, Trevor," I said, gently but firmly, "I'm not having this conversation. Tomorrow is my Christmas gathering too, in my house. My centerpiece stays." He nodded. He didn't argue. It wasn't enough, but it was something. The next morning, December 23rd, I woke before dawn the way I always do before a holiday meal. Wool socks, robe tied tight, the coffee maker hissing softly in a dark kitchen. There is a kind of private peace in holiday cooking when the house is still yours. It's one of the purest domestic pleasures I know. The counter full of ingredients, the stock pot warming, butter softening near the stove, the small decisions made by instinct because you've made the same meal often enough that memory lives in your hands. I peeled apples for pie and thought of my mother. I rubbed sage butter under the turkey skin and thought of Gerald standing at this same oven trying to sneak crispy bits off the breast before dinner. I chopped celery and onions and listened to the furnace click on and off. By 10, the windows were clouded with kitchen steam. By noon, the pies were cooling on wire racks on the counter. By 2, I'd changed the table linens, polished the glasses, and set out the embroidered placemats I'd made in the winter of 1998, when Gerald's mother was ill and I needed something to do with my hands in the evenings. By 4:30, the house smelled exactly the way Christmas has always smelled to me. Rosemary, pastry, citrus, broth, heat. Guests arrived around 6. Pam came first, pleasant, well-dressed, apologizing for the cold, as if she'd personally arranged the weather. Her husband Greg followed with a bottle of red wine and an easy smile. Then came 2 women I'd only met once before, both from Sasha's professional circle, polished in that bright, careful way people are when image matters slightly more than intimacy. I greeted everyone, took coats, pointed them toward the living room where the tree was lit, and the candle in the front window was already glowing against the dark. I had just gone back to the kitchen to check the gravy when Sasha appeared in the doorway. She looked at me, the apron, the oven mitts, the flushed face, the reading glasses, and she said it. "We didn't really plan this as your thing, Beverly. Maybe you'd be more comfortable upstairs tonight." I want to describe this moment carefully, because people expect rage here, and rage is not what I felt. What I felt was colder and cleaner than rage. What I felt was the last of my confusion leaving me, like a fog lifting off a road and suddenly seeing the drop-off that had been there the entire time. Every softened conversation, every delayed objection, every time I'd chosen grace in the hope that grace would be met halfway, every moved pillow, every hidden mug, every monitor installed after I'd said no, every phrase like "whatever you prefer," delivered with a smile that meant the opposite. It all snapped into a different shape. This was not miscommunication. This was not a young couple being a little careless while they got back on their feet. This was a woman standing in my kitchen, in my house, after I'd spent 10 hours cooking, telling me to remove myself from the center of my own life because she had mistaken patience for surrender. I took off my apron. I folded it carefully and laid it on the counter next to the gravy boat. Then I walked out of the kitchen, but I did not go upstairs. I walked into the dining room where the guests had started settling around the table. I pulled out the chair at the head, my chair, the chair I had sat in every Christmas since Gerald died, the chair I'd sat in before that while he carved the turkey at the opposite end with far more ceremony than the task required, narrating the process like a sportscaster until Trevor laughed so hard milk came out of his nose, which happened at Thanksgiving 2011 and became a story Gerald told at every subsequent holiday until the day he couldn't tell stories anymore. I sat down. The room went quiet, not dramatic movie quiet. Just the natural pause that happens when someone takes a seat with the kind of certainty that doesn't require explanation. Sasha appeared in the doorway behind me. I didn't need to turn around. "Pam," I said warmly, "it's so good to see you again. How's the new landscaping coming along? Trevor mentioned you were redoing the front beds." Pam blinked, then smiled with the visible relief of someone happy to step into safe conversational ground. "Oh, Beverly, don't get me started. Greg decided he was going to do it himself, and now we have a yard that looks like a construction site." Greg laughed. I told her, if I see one more landscaping quote over $5,000, I'm putting in gravel and calling it minimalist. One of Sasha's friends asked whether the cranberry sauce was homemade because the color was incredible. I said yes, it was my mother's recipe, passed down from her mother before that, and the secret was a little bit of orange zest and the willingness to let it cook longer than you think it needs. The other friend asked about my placemats. I told her I'd embroidered them during a Michigan winter that seemed determined to never end, the year Gerald's mother was ill and I needed something to do with my hands in the evenings that wasn't worrying. Conversation moved. That is one of the quietest forms of power available to a woman my age. The ability to keep a room from going where someone else intended it to go. I answered questions. I asked my own. I smiled where smiling was appropriate. I never raised my voice, never looked flustered, never offered an explanation for my presence at my own table, because I did not require one. Eventually, Sasha took her seat. Dinner was served. My turkey, my stuffing, my cranberry sauce, my pies, and I sat at the head of my table. If you're hoping for some grand scene, wine glasses trembling, a guest gasping, someone storming out while a chair topples, life doesn't usually work that way. Most reckonings happen in ordinary tones. The meal continued. Greg went back for seconds on the stuffing. Pam asked for the pie recipe. One of Sasha's friends complimented represented the table setting. Trevor barely spoke. Sasha spoke too brightly for the first 20 minutes, and then progressively less. But the silence that mattered was not the silence of the guests. It was the silence of a boundary becoming visible. After everyone left, I did the dishes. Yes, the dishes. Because it was my kitchen. Because there is something almost medicinal about washing up after a meal. Plates cleared, glasses rinsed, platters soaking, the soft clink of cutlery against the basin. Domestic life returned to sequence. When I finished, I dried my hands and went into the living room. The tree lights were still on. The house had that post-gathering quiet that always feels a little tender, as if the walls are tired too. Trevor came in and sat across from me. Sasha stayed in the dining room. I could hear her moving around, a drawer opening, a chair being shifted across the floor. "Mom," Trevor said. Then he stopped and started over. "I didn't know she was going to say that to you." "I know. I'm sorry." He looked older than I was used to seeing him. Not physically older. Worn. There are marriages that create expansion in people, and marriages that create a constant, subtle brace. He looked braced. "Trevor," I said, "I need you to hear something fully, not just react to it in the moment. I have been kind. I have been patient. I have made room for both of you in ways I do not regret, but I cannot keep making room if what fills that room is disregard. I cannot keep stepping aside in my own house so that other people can pretend the center belongs to them." He was quiet. Outside, somewhere down the block, a car passed with Christmas music drifting through the glass. "I know we've overstayed," he said finally. I said nothing. He looked at his hands. "I think I've been avoiding all of this because staying felt easier. Easier than figuring out what Sasha and I actually need to figure out." That sentence told me more than anything else had in months. The problem wasn't just my house. My house had become the container for a marriage that didn't want to face itself. My routines, my patience, my cooking, my availability, those had become a cushion, something soft enough to absorb pressure that should have gone elsewhere, something to lean on so that harder truths could be postponed. But I am not a holding pattern for other people's unresolved lives. "I love you," I told him. "I will always love you. And I need you and Sasha to find your own place by February 1st. I will help with listings. I'll help with first and last month's rent if money is still tight. I won't make this harder than it needs to be, but February 1st is the date." He nodded. He did not argue. And I think somewhere beneath the shame and the exhaustion and the conflict, he felt relieved. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. Not easy, but clearer. That's something people don't say enough about boundaries. They don't make life instantly comfortable, but they make it cleaner. Trevor looked at apartments. He and Sasha had tense, closed-door conversations at night. The kind you can feel in the hallway even when you can't hear the words. There were days Sasha barely spoke to me except in clipped, practical sentences. Other days she was almost aggressively cordial, as if she could undo what had happened through performance. But the spell was broken. Once a truth becomes visible, it rarely agrees to go back into hiding. They found a 2-bedroom apartment about 20 minutes away. Decent neighborhood, coffee shop on the corner, small park nearby. Lease started at the end of January. They moved out on January 28th, 3 days before the deadline. I stood on the front porch in my winter coat and watched the rented van back out of the driveway. Trevor came up and hugged me. He held on longer than usual. "Thank you," he said quietly. I kissed his cheek. "Take care of yourself." Sasha gave me a brief hug. Her perfume was cool and expensive. "We'll be in touch," she said. Then they drove away. I watched until the van turned the corner and disappeared. And then I went inside. The silence was almost physical. Not empty, not lonely, restored. I stood in the hallway and looked at Patricia's watercolor. Moved it half an inch higher on the nail because it had always hung just slightly crooked, and that had finally begun to bother me. I went into the kitchen and returned Trevor's handmade mug to the front of the cupboard. I opened the sewing room door and stood there for a moment, just breathing, the smell of fabric and old wood and closed windows. My grandmother's cabinet was still slightly out of position. I moved it back. There is a particular kind of healing in putting familiar objects into their rightful places with your own hands. Not because objects are everything, but because they witness whether you're still allowed to decide the shape of your days. That evening, I pulled all my fabric back onto the shelves and sorted it by color the way I liked it. Navy beside slate, cream beside oatmeal, pale blue beside faded indigo. Then I sat down at my work table and started cutting pieces for a quilt I'd been planning for months. Blue and cream, a flying geese pattern I first learned in my 20s and always meant to return to. Trevor calls me twice a week now. Our conversations are better than they were during that entire year under the same roof. Distance made truth easier. Without the daily noise of avoidance, he sounds more like himself, softer, clearer. A few weeks ago, he told me he and Sasha had started seeing a counselor together. Margaret Ellison, licensed marriage and family therapist, someone a friend from his new job had recommended. I thought that showed courage. I didn't ask questions beyond what he volunteered. Their marriage is their work. I spent too many months serving as insulation for difficulties that didn't belong to me. In February, Sasha sent me a text. Short. She wrote that she knew things had been difficult and was sorry for the part she played. I sat with that message for a long time. Then I wrote back, "Thank you for saying that. I wish you both well." And I meant it. Forgiveness, as I understand it now, doesn't require restored access. It doesn't demand renewed intimacy. Sometimes forgiveness is simply the refusal to keep dragging old glass across your own palm. My sister Elaine came to visit in March. We sat at the dining room table with cranberry tea and lemon loaf made from our mother's recipe. She picked up one of the embroidered placemats and said, "You made these in the 90s, didn't you?" I laughed. 1998. The winter Gerald's mother mother was ill. Elaine looked around the room. You keep everything, she said, not critically, just factually. I keep what matters, I told her. That's the distinction. Not everything, just what matters. The flying geese quilt is nearly finished. I work on it most evenings under my good lamp in the sewing room. Sometimes I put on music. Sometimes I leave the house completely quiet, except for the small, dry sound of fabric moving under my hands. I'm thinking I may give the quilt to Trevor and Sasha when it's done. Not as an apology, not as a peace offering, not as an attempt to erase anything, just as a quilt. A useful thing, a warm thing, a thing made carefully. But it will be made in my sewing room, in my house, on my schedule. And that is not a small detail. That is everything. If there is anything worth carrying away from this, it's not that daughters-in-law are difficult, or that sons disappoint their mothers, or that generosity is foolish. It's something smaller and more useful than any of that. The moment someone fully crosses a boundary in your life rarely arrives first. It's preceded. It's prepared. It's built from earlier moments you told yourself didn't matter enough to name. A pillow moved, a painting taken down, a room repurposed after you said no, a phrase like more like home spoken inside the home that is already yours. And if you let those moments pass in silence, because you love someone, because you want peace, because you're embarrassed to seem petty, because women of a certain generation were taught that graciousness is measured by how much discomfort we can absorb without complaint, then the silence accumulates. It grows. It becomes the loudest thing in the room. You are allowed to interrupt that silence. You are allowed to sit at the head of your own table. You are allowed to say it kindly, clearly, and without performing guilt to make other people comfortable. Love does not require self-erasure. Generosity is not surrender. And your home is not just an address. It is the shape of your life. Tend it accordingly.